Good morning, everyone. This is Adrian Lamb from MANNS News. Today's focus is going to be centered around Iran. Coming up today in our program, first we are going to dive in about how religious minorities are experiencing more and more oppression due to the theocratic government. Also talking about Iran's struggle to maintain its control over COVID-19 as recent spikes in cases have occurred. Here's Sam with a little recap on what's happening to religious minorities in Iran.
Thanks, Adrian. The Iranian people are very divided. A very religious population in rural areas have massive support for the current Islamic Republic of Iran under Rouhani. This is a stark contrast to the less religious, urban educated minority population. For many years, the Iranian government has suppressed and violated the rights of people who oppose them. According to Amnesty International, the authorities heavily suppressed the right to freedom of expression, association, and assembly. Security forces used lethal force unlawfully to crush protests, killing hundreds, and arbitrarily detained thousands of protesters. At the same time, the rural support for the government is heavily based on their opposition to the Western world. Iranians have long had to see the West as a source of foreign influence and control, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Although the opposition has tried to overthrow the government, they have been unsuccessful. The government has been very effective at suppressing and limiting their ability to run for government office. This has left them out of the government holding no power. Now on to Adrian, who will talk about policies put in place that affect both sides.
Like Sam stated, Iran's government is a theocracy with little democracy. According to Freedom House, Iran scores a 17 out of 100 for the freeness of its people. As a reference, the UK has a 94 of 100. However, they do not have any policies to help support these minority groups from getting discriminated against. They do recognize the Eurasians, Iranian Christians, and Jews. The Iranian government has even actively executed and violently attacked those of small minority groups. According to Javad Remain, a human rights expert, over the past 40 years, the Baha'is, considered to be the largest non-Muslim and unrecognizable religious minorities of the Islamic Republic of Iran, numbering estimating to 350,000, have suffered from most egregious forms of repression, persecution, execution, and victimization. Since the government enforces this behavior, they are not willing to do much to protect the religious minorities. Here's Nathan, our government expert, to talk about how the government system is structured to deal with this issue.
Thanks, Adrian. Iran follows a mixed system of government where the judicial, executive, and legislative branches are overseen by many bodies dominated by the clergy, with Hassan Rouhani as president. The Islamic Republic of Iran acknowledges Islam as its main religion, and Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism. The Rouhani administration has been very repressive of its people. Although Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism are nationally accepted, they are still subject to harassment and even death. This has created a large ethnic cleavage in Iran. As Iran continues to oppress its citizens, it hinders its ability to acknowledge its religious divide. Now we will hear from Milo, who will further explain the global impacts of this religious divide.
Thank you, Nathan. Another question remains: how does Iran's minority and religious groups' oppression affect the rest of the world? One way that oppression can and will affect the rest of the world is if the oppression that is happening against certain groups continues to happen even outside of Iran. This is a very possible outcome and one that we have already seen with the Holocaust, where over 10 million people from minority and religious groups were killed. The oppression of minority, mainly Jews, started in Germany, however, quickly migrated to the rest of the world. If we continue to succumb to the oppression that is happening in Iran, we may see another Holocaust.
As you may know by now, COVID 19 has taken the world by storm, creating one of the most deadliest pandemics in recent history. It's affected everyone in some way, shape, or form through social issues, economic insecurity, and pressure within governments around the world. This calls for a time of transparency, truth, and unity, but for Iranians, these traits are non existent. To start, let's look at cases and testing in Iran. According to the Iranian government, there have been 84,802 reported positive cases and 5,297 deaths. However, the USIP, which stands for the United States Institute of Peace, and the U.S. State Department have disputed these numbers and believe that Iran is covering up to 5 times the true number of cases and deaths in the country. This is misleading to its people, giving them a false sense of safety, which may lead to more cases and deaths. In addition to these false numbers, the government is also showing that they aren't taking this pandemic seriously by relaxing restrictions and gatherings and reopening businesses.
Thank you, Nathan M. Early on in the pandemic, Iran was one of the leaders in positive cases and has struggled to show its legitimacy with the virus, with leaders denying the presence of the virus in their country. Since then, Iran has been testing more and more to find more cases and limit the spread of the virus. According to the BBC, President Rouhani has told Iranians that they must wear face masks on public transport and in crowded areas, and said where necessary, the police and security forces will enforce these rules. Also, in July, authorities in the capital, Tehran, announced restrictions were being reimposed on businesses, public gatherings, including wedding halls, coffee shops, tea houses, amusement parks, and zoos. Despite all these efforts, the cases are still coming in. Nathan L. is going to go deeper into how the Iranian government is able to deal with COVID.
Thanks, Adrian. Many questions have surfaced about how Iran has dealt with these issues. U.S. sanctions threaten Iran's ability to cope with the virus, making it hard to get adequate funds in order to combat the virus. Iran is one of the top 10 countries in the world most affected by the virus. Iran has also neglected CDC social distancing regulations by reopening mosques and businesses in order to keep its economy from total collapse. In order to maintain the popular opinion among its citizens, Iran has been suspected of underreporting the number of cases that they have actually had. This creates a false sense of security, which has led to Iran's recent spikes in cases. And now Milo will further explain the global impact of COVID.
Another question that remains is how does Iran's policy on COVID-19 affect the rest of the world? One way that it would affect the way that people live in other countries is the threat of spread of COVID-19 to other countries. According to the CDC, Iran has a level 4 threat of COVID spread, which is the highest threat a country can be on the CDC scales. This could prove fatal to the already corrupt oil and gas economy of Iran. If cases keep going up in Iran, the amount of oil and gas production will go down, and the trade of oil and gas will decline as well, creating a resource curse. This global pandemic has affected each and every one of us. However, if we stay strong, we will get through these unprecedented times together. That's all for tonight, folks. Remember to stay safe and healthy during these times. Thank you for listening.